Welcome back to the channel. And if you're new to the channel, thank you for watching. So graphics cards, they're expensive. And if you're building a used computer or flipping PCs, you'll learn really quickly that a graphics card can make or break your build, especially the wallet. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I picked up some used parts. I think it was like an i5 10400, 16 gigs of DDR4, M.2, don't remember. Got a case, got a power supply, got it dirt cheap on the Facebook marketplace. Folks, if you're not asleep and you're awake and you're vigilant, you could get some really good deals. First come, first serve. Well, I need a graphics card for it, and the graphics card, depending if you're going used or new, costs anywhere from $100 to $400, at least one to complement that build, and that's gonna hurt the profit in the wallet really quick. So most of the time, I go out and I buy used graphics cards. It is a gamble, absolutely, but I do pretty good with it. Another thing that I've done is I've actually gone out and picked up for parts or broken graphics cards that I've gotten them dirt cheap. I'm talking about like either here it is, it's free, I don't want to deal with it no more, or $20 or $30. Take the gamble. That's more 50-50. So in today's video, we're going to go over what to do when you get a used graphics card, how to test it, and if you got one that's for parts or not working as they label it on eBay, you can apply these methods and potentially bring the graphics card back around and make sure your used graphics card is good for sale. So let's get started and show you what we got. So I've had a bunch of viewers reach out to me recently and they said, hey, I got this broken graphics card, it's not working, it's doing XYZ, I'm done with it, I'm about ready to turn it into trash, do you want it? Absolutely. If it's broken, I'll take it. So if you have a broken graphics card that you're getting ready to throw out, email me, dlmtechgarage@gmail.com. I might be able to take a look at it and see what I can do with it. But moving on, a viewer reaches out to me, they send me this, and I was like, absolutely. It's a MSI GeForce RTX, it's the 3050, and he says that when he powers it up, it gives him a screen, all that good stuff, but when he puts a load on it, it crashes. I want to dive into it, see exactly what it's doing, and see if some of these methods that we're going to try today are going to work. So we're going to go over step by step on how to test it, what you need to do, and depending on what you find, determine how far down the rabbit hole we need to go. So first things first, you're going out, you're buying used graphics cards, a broken one, what do you need? The first thing you're going to need is a test bench, and I can't recommend this enough. Yes, can you use your rig? Absolutely. But you should be using a spare PC. And hear me out. You don't want your, main rig that you spent a lot of money on, taking graphics cards in and out and potentially damaging things, corrupting things, or if there's a weird short on the graphics card, fry your rig. It's happened to me, I've done it, I've seen it happen. So have a test rig. And if you're gonna have a test rig set up for it, another thing to keep in mind, it's not a deal breaker, but it is something that you should consider. Number one, see if it has an iGPU. This one doesn't, but because it doesn't have an iGPU, I have a second PCIe slot. So I could take one graphics card, put one up here, put another one up here, and do testing. And the reason for this is, and we'll talk a little more about it later, is that if we have to flash the BIOS, because that's usually kind of the last resort, you're not gonna be able to do it if this graphics card is not giving you an image, or if it just keeps crashing. Keep that in mind. So now that you have your dedicated sacrificial rig, what you wanna do next is take the graphics card and give it a good visual inspection. Take a look at it. What we're looking for is signs of liquid damage. It would be evident. Look into it. Look for something that shows that it was dropped, broken, or cracked. You would see obviously, dings from the metal, or if the card was bent, you would see crack in the PCB or stuff like that. Check over here for the pin contacts, see if they got damage in any which way. You're just looking for signs that this thing has been physically damaged with, liquid, or it's been dropped or anything like that. This one looks perfect. Now you might be saying, well, maybe it was liquid damage and they took it apart and they cleaned it up really good. True, that does happen, but you could kind of get an idea. And the other thing too is that if it has a tamper screw, that's going to give you an idea of how far they try to diagnose it. Now this one is not messed with, but don't let this fool you. I've actually seen people where they have actually taken like tweezers and needle nose and taken out the screw like that nice and easily, and they hide what they did. So take all that with a grain of salt. So now that you've done your visual inspection, you say, you know what, nothing looks broken, I don't see evidence of liquid damage. next thing we need to do is use the schnauzer, use the nose, you know? The nose knows, and the nose knows it all. And the nose tells everything. Smell it. Take a good whiff. Let's take a smell. Refreshing. And what we're smelling for is signs that this thing has been burnt. Now, if there was a short or anything or something got burnt on it, that smell does not go away easily. Also, it's going to give you an idea if you're smelling it, if roaches were hanging out in here, if the person was a heavy smoker, it's going to give you an idea that you're probably going to have to dive deeper into it. In the case of this graphics card, it smells great. I don't smell anything or see anything look suspicious. In fact, this thing looks like brand new, like it really doesn't have any miles on it. You know, low miles. So it looks pretty good. And a perfect example of why you would want to smell it, take a look at this one. So this is a 980 that I had gotten. There will be, or there is out, a video. I turned it on and poof, burnt, barbecue. I smelt it initially and I doubted my nose, but I had smelled a hint of the burn. And then it smoked on my bench. That was exciting. Don't take it apart just yet. Pop it in the rig, and what we need to do now is verify the complaint. We need to see that this thing is crashing under load. So pop it in, see what it does, and then we'll go from there. So let's go ahead and pop it in. Let's see, this uses an 8-pin. All right, make sure it's seated correctly. This is sitting down. This is good, and you're good to go. So now let's give it some power. Plug in the HDMI, and let's fire it up. So we got life, it's spinning, and as you can see, it's booting into Windows. So you might say, hey, this thing is good to go. No, 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 no. Calm down, relax. We're not out of the woods yet. This could be the beginning of something bigger. So I'm gonna go ahead off camera, install the latest drivers, and then we're gonna run some stress on it. So as you saw, it booted up, it goes into Windows. We're not seeing any weird artifacting or anything like that, but like I said, don't get too excited just yet. We need to install the latest and the greatest drivers. If you're installing the drivers and this thing starts artifacting, starts crashing, blue screens, or anything like that, then that is a good sign that there's something more serious with the graphics card. If you can't get the graphics card drivers installed, that's an issue. Now you might say, or some might be watching this saying, hey, you should install use DDU. That's a program display drivers update, and I'll post links to all these different softwares we'll talk about in today's video. What that does is that completely wipes out all the original drivers that you've had. Like in the case of this test rig, I have AMD drivers, different versions of graphics card drivers. It gets rid of all that stuff, puts everything fresh. But does that work? Is that another option? Yes. That's usually the one I kind of do last. Now the next piece of software that we need to use is Text PowerUp GPUz. I love this software. I call it the Tattletale. It's gonna tell you, number one, if the graphic cards are phony, and number two, it's gonna let you know if the memory is bad. Let's load up GPUz and let's see what it tells us about this graphics card. So I'm not sure how well this comes out on camera, but so far we're looking good. So RTX 3050, MSI, okay, good. Showing the BIOS version, that's good. But the biggest thing we're looking for is the GPU clock and default clock. If you come over here and you're seeing all zeros, pretty much the graphics card is done for. In this case, we can see the GPU clock is 1552, default clock 1552, memory 1750, same thing over here. So we have numbers. If you're seeing zeros over here, yeah, you're not gonna be able to do much with this. So we're off to a good start. Still haven't confirmed the issue that was alleged with this graphics card, but so far drivers are installed and GPUz is telling us this thing is showing what it's supposed to be. Now, if you buy one of those AliExpress or Temu graphics cards that's supposed to be like a 4090 and it's probably the size of a low profile graphics card, run this software. It'll tell you exactly what that graphics card is. So good stuff. We'll post links for it in the comments. So now what we need to do is we need to stress this graphics card. So it's a couple of softwares you can use. You can use Furmark or you can use Heaven Benchmark. I like Heaven Benchmark. It's entertaining, it's pretty for me. Furmark does stress it a lot more and a lot better. I will give it that much. Another piece of software that I like to use is MSI Afterburner. Now with MSI Afterburner, nope, time for updates. It's gonna tell us a bunch of things. It's gonna tell us the temp, it's gonna tell us the memory, it's gonna tell us the GPU frequency, it's gonna tell us all that type of stuff. But also, if later on the issue with the graphics card is that it can't run at the designated speeds, we can downclock the graphics card to see where it needs to be for it to work. So we got this up and running. Let's go ahead, let's run Heaven Benchmark, and let's see what this thing does. And now using MSI Afterburner, you can use the Riva, TNT, whatever you want to call it. I forget exactly what it's called, but it gives you the statistics up on the top left. Of course, you got to set it up, but so far, our GPU temp, 41 degrees Celsius, 100% utilization, CPU, well, we're not worried about that. This thing seems to be working perfect. Now, what you want to do next is let this thing run. Let it run for about 20 to 30 minutes. Let it get heat soak and see if when it heats up, does it crash? But so far, I'm not seeing anything. If you had an issue as far as temperatures, obviously the temperature would spike up immediately. If there was an issue with the memory or anything else, you would start getting the artifacting. But we have no artifacting. GPUz is showing us that it's reading like it's supposed to be. The driver's installed properly. So we're looking pretty good. So I've been messing with this for about 30 minutes off camera, and I've learned something new. Transparency is always good. I think from now on, I'm not going to use Heaven Benchmark as much as I used to. Here's why. I ran Heaven Benchmark for about 10 minutes. This thing ran flawlessly, no issues. Well, I decided to give Furmark a try, and yeah, we're able to duplicate the issue. So let me show you what's going on. Run Furmark, and one thing about Furmark, like I said, it really stresses, puts a good stress on your graphics card. It also gives you more information about the hotspots and all that type of good stuff. So I'm gonna run it. And usually, probably about maybe 10, 15 seconds, it crashes the system. Now our temperature is at 52, 53, 58, but I found when it hits 60, it would do it. We're about to hit 60. There we go. We hit 60 degrees Celsius, and it crashes. And that took about 30 seconds to get there. All right, so we have good data. So now we're booted back up. Let's look at what we have. Every time it hits 60 degrees Celsius, it crashes. 60 degrees Celsius is not terrible as far as temperatures, but when the card gets that hot, that's when it acts up. Heaven Benchmark, it was only able to sit at the highest I saw it sit was 56, 57. Furmark started ramping it, so it could be as simple as a thermal paste issue. It could be as something as being dirty on the card. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take it off the bench, open it up, see what we find, give it a good cleaning, which we're going to go through all that. First thermal paste, and then see what happens. So now we're going to try to go down the path of least resistance. And what I mean by the path of least resistance is that we could go ahead and try to update the BIOS. I've seen that bring cards around. That could be the issue there. But that takes a little more time and a little more know-how, and I really don't feel like tinkering with that right now, but we'll go into that in just a sec. But I'm really curious to see what's underneath this. Could it be that it has such a dramatic spike in the temperature that it's causing it to crash? I don't know, but we're going to find out. So let's start with this. Let's break the tamper screw. Now I can never return it. Darn. Let's see, does this come out like friendly? Or do you have to take everything apart? I think you have to take out more screws. Yep. So let's take all these out. Now, typically I've seen that with graphics cards where they're obviously overheating. They hit like 80 degrees Celsius and, you know, that's what causes, or even higher, and that's when they start shutting down. But this one, I'm not sure, because it's not getting ridiculously hot, but it is getting hotter than, you know, normal. Whoa, okay, all right. Now we got our connectors. Now this is where you want to be careful. Never pull from the connector, from the wires. Just get some pliers, pull nice and easy. Don't squeeze it too hard, or you can break this. These are just some regular pliers that I've had. So, all right. And I think there's one on this side. Yep, sure is. Bingo. So just taking a look at it, what do I see? This thermal paste is like hard as a rock. But like I've said before, typically you'll see the spike, but you'll see the temperature get higher than that before they crash. But this thermal paste is junk. Yeah, like typically you get that residue on your finger. I mean, this is hard as a rock. I'm just going to scrape this off with a plastic razor just to kind of demonstrate how hard it is. Look at that. Don't use a regular razor. Plastic only, folks. I'm going to spray a little alcohol on here. Use a shop towel just to get that off. Brand new. Now for this, let's just wipe it off, and then we'll use the alcohol to kind of clean it up better. I mean, this stuff is like crumbling. Now all this dried up thermal paste over here, be careful with it. You know, there's little electrical components that we don't want to pop off. So I'm just going to use this and just nice and easy through the edge. Do you have to take this stuff off? No, but my OCD gets the best of me. Doesn't really make a difference. At least from my experience. If you had different experience not taking that stuff off, let me know in the comments, please. Be good to know. All right, that looks a lot better. We can be here all day getting into those fine grooves, but the thing is that if you're too rough with it, you could break one of those off. It don't take much. And then in our case, video over. So that looks a lot better. Now, just want to do a visual inspection. Visual inspection is key. So first off, no sign of spill. And if I miss anything, let me know in the comments. But what I'm looking for is just something that's broken or obviously missing. Broken capacitors, fuses, especially like up here or anything like that. But if you had something typically like that, then you probably wouldn't get power to anything. But everything else looks pretty good. So we're going to run with it for now. Go down the path of least resistance. Now, we're going to put fresh thermal paste on this, assemble the card back together, and see if it does the same thing. If it starts doing the same thing, then we'll have to open it back up, and then we'll give it a cleaning. And what I mean by cleaning is, you know, spraying it down with alcohol, just checking. But in this case, I don't really think we have anything to gain from that because this card just looks perfect. It still looks brand spanking new. So let's start with the thermal paste, and let's see what happens. Card's put back together. I have my doubts if that's going to fix it, but you never know. I can tell you right now the temperatures are slightly lower. It's at 21.5 degrees Celsius. I think before it was about 24, 25. That is a slight improvement. And if you're wondering why the temperature is so low, it's a little cold in the garage today. But anyways, let's hit run. So we're up to 34 seconds, which is way better than before. It's longer. We're at 58. Fans are kicking on. 43 seconds. There is an improvement in the temperatures, I will say that. We're at 1 minute and 30 seconds, so I'm gonna let this thing run. We're gonna stress it. When I turn the camera back on, either this thing has crashed or it's still working good. We'll see. So it's been 20 minutes and she lives. We fixed it. 21 minutes, temperature 59, spiked up to 60 degrees, actually spiked up to 62 during this, and yeah, it has not crashed, it has not rebooted, and this thing is working solid. So now you're probably saying, oh man, this is good, we're good to go, it works. No, not yet. If you're gonna have a graphics card like this that you're gonna end up flipping or selling, whatever you decide to do with it, you need to make sure that it really works. Let me show you what you need to do next. So at this point, you're probably thinking, everything's working, I'm good to go, stress tests are fine on it, temperatures are fine. Don't count your chickens before they hatch, folks. Here's what happened to me, and I learned this lesson a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, I had a graphics card that came in, refurbished it, did all that type of stuff and everything, put it in a build, sent it out, and customer calls me 2 days later, says, hey, this thing keeps crashing on me every time I'm gaming. I'm like, what in the world? It was working fine. Brought it back to the garage, did more stress tests on it, and I could not get it to crash. It wasn't until I loaded the game and several other games that the graphics card kept on crashing on me. So before you send it out, game on it. My rule of thumb is any PC and or graphics card that leaves this garage, I game on it for an hour. Number one, helps me to catch up with my gaming, and number two, gives me better confidence on what I'm sending out. So Last of Us, 1080p, medium settings, and our temperature is 62 degrees Celsius, spikes up, spikes down, all that type of good stuff, but it's running fine. It's running solid. I've already been gaming on this on and off for about 20 minutes. I keep dying because I'm using the keyboard, and I'm not good at using the keyboard. I use an Xbox controller. But as you can see, the game runs fine. The 3050 performs very well, and yeah, it's solid, it's good to go. And I would dare say that the issue with this graphics card was that the thermal paste was dry as can be. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna wrap this thing up, and we're gonna talk about a few other things that you need to look for that unfortunately we were not able to cover because the graphics card is working fine and I didn't have to dive deeper, but a couple of other techniques and a couple other things that you can try to bring your graphics card around. All right, so obviously we saw that the thermal paste, and I still have some of it right over here. I mean, this thing was like little chunks of rocks, kind of plaster rubber material, pretty bad. And it's weird because typically I would see the temperatures climb up, but it might have been spiking too much for the program to keep up with. But fresh thermal paste resolved the issue. So now let's say the scenario that you change the thermal paste and it's still doing the same thing. Well, another thing that you need to keep in mind, and I didn't mention this before, is the thermal pads. If the thermal pads are dried up, they're not to the proper thickness, they're not going to make contact with the memory chips, and then that's going to cause it to also overheat and potentially crash. So check your thermal pads. And if your thermal pads and your thermal paste are all in check, everything's looking good, and it's still doing the same issue, then the next thing you might want to do is go ahead and consider giving this thing a good cleaning. How can we give this thing a good cleaning? Isopropyl alcohol is the safest way that I found to do it. I've been doing this for years with a soft bristle toothbrush. I've never had an issue, and it's actually brought cards back around just doing it that way. So now I recommend using a spray bottle because the pressure will actually get into the little crevices. And typically what I'll do is, and this is, one that's no longer working, but I'll spray it just like so, get in the little crevices. And then what I'll do is I'll take soft bristle toothbrush. And the reason why I say soft bristle is because we don't want to break any of these little components on it. And I'll just give it a nice clean, just like so, clean it up, nice and easy. And I'll work all the different traces, all the different chips and everything. And the thing with isopropyl alcohol, the higher the better. This is 91%. They do have it higher. Nothing less than 91%, folks. But go ahead, spray that, get that stuff good in there, clean it up real good, get this thing nice and clean. And what it will do is that if there's dirt, debris, and we all know that dust and dirt actually can be conductive, it will break it free, and that might resolve some of the issues. It's not a guarantee, but it is something that can work, and I have found it to work. The other thing too is once you're done with it, take an air duster. This is one that I got on Amazon for what, 60, 70 bucks years ago. I love it, it's fantastic. And go ahead and blow it until it's nice and dry. Let this thing sit for about 10, 15 minutes. The alcohol will evaporate. This will make sure that it's off the graphics card. Put it back together, thermal paste and everything, and see if it comes back around. Like I said, I've had success that way, but if you plug it in and it's still doing the same thing, then you have something that's potentially damaged on the board. But there might be one last hope. If you tried all that, then go ahead at that point and flash the BIOS. You can get onto Tech Power Up's website. You could download the BIOS from the manufacturer. You can look it up. It's really easy. I actually have a dedicated video on BIOS flashing. You can flash the BIOS, and sometimes that might bring it around too. I've had that happen. That works really good. It's a little more involved. Check out that video if you want a guide on how to flash your BIOS. But even then, if it's not working, now we got to dive deeper. And you might be saying, what do we need to do exactly to dive deeper? Well, there's two things you can do. One is a Hail Mary. It's like you've exhausted all the stuff, but I don't even do that. This last part I'm going to talk about until I do a few other things. Depending on your level of skill and comfortness, or if you're willing to send this thing out to get repaired or professionally looked at, which they're going to charge you a penny, you can take a multimeter. This is a cheap one that I use, and you can start testing different fuses. You can start testing different areas, check for shorts to ground. I've never showed it on camera. It's a little more involved. There is a basic way that I do it, and I've actually had success where I found out that it was something as simple as, you know, a fuse being shorted out or a broken capacitor or something like that, and then you have to go ahead, resolder it. The parts are pretty cheap. You can get them on Amazon. But it is a bit more involved, but there are plenty of videos that show you how to do it. I tend to go down that route first. Sometimes I get lucky and it's something simple as just replacing something on the board that I'm able to prove that, you know, it's a short to ground. But if all that doesn't work, or you're not comfortable, but if you're not comfortable with doing this, then the toaster oven trick. Get a toaster oven, heat it up. I forget exactly how many degrees to do it. I haven't done it in years, but you can put it in the toaster oven, heat it up. Sometimes that might resolder, reflow things that might, you know, have gotten loose, and that tends to work. But that's just a last resort after I've actually gone through testing and making sure I have no shorts or anything else that's bad on the board. Now, in the case of this graphics card, obviously we had a screen, so we were able to go in and diagnose it and get an idea of what it was doing or what it wasn't doing. But let's say the scenario that you don't have a display. What can you do? First things first, start simple. Always think simple. Number one, check all your ports. I've had this happen where the HDMI is broken. I put in a display port. It works perfectly fine. Vice versa. Try all the different ports on the card. If you're not getting display out of any one of them, then it's time to dive deeper. Now, if all your ports are not working, display, HDMI, DVI, just depending on the generation of your card, the next thing that you might want to do is, because you're not getting display, is plug in a card that does work so you can get into Windows. And what that will allow you to do is, you know, you plug into the iGPU, plug the HDMI or display port into the iGPU or the card that does work, use this as a secondary, and see if Windows detects the card. If Windows doesn't detect the card, then you're kind of out of luck on that. But if it does detect the card, sometimes you can get away with just, like I said earlier, flashing the BIOS. You could have a mining BIOS on it. It could have a corrupt BIOS, and that too also might bring it around. So, buying used graphics cards or broken graphics cards is a gamble. It's hit or miss. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. Now, I am not encouraging you by no means to go out and buy every used or broken graphics cards you see. My thing with used graphics cards, if you're gonna get it from a seller on the Facebook Marketplace or anything like that, ask them for a video of it, try to get more pictures for it, see, hey, tell them, hey, if this thing doesn't work, can I bring it back? You know, try to negotiate it. Obviously, eBay, you have the return policy that works really good. And when you get these used graphics cards that are allegedly working, thoroughly test them, make sure not only that they pass the stress test, but you can actually game on them, as sometimes they do crash when you game. Now, broken graphics cards, like I said, to just go out there and get them, It's not worth it unless you get it dirt cheap or free. I'll take a broken graphics card for free any day of the week, or if I see one that has some value, I'll buy it at the low for like maybe $20, $30. And if I can't get it working trying these methods, or even trying to check for shorts to grounds or anything like that, you can flip them. There are people who buy them for parts, or depending on the level of the graphics card. Like I'm sure right now, if you used to get a 4090 for $100, I'm sure there's somebody who will buy it for $200, $300. There are people who know how to fix it. There are people who are good at that. And then there are people who just need it for parts to make multiple 4090s working. Something to consider. I'm not an expert. This is what works for me. Do it at your own risk. Depending on your level of skills, you can do really good. So with all that being said, comment down below, let me know your thoughts, concerns, criticisms. What are your experiences buying used or broken graphics cards? Have you been lucky? What are your tips or tricks that you recommend to kind of ensure that they do work, or even bring them back around? And if you're interested in sending your broken graphics card that you're looking to get rid of to the channel, email me, dlmtechgarage@gmail.com. If you like this video, definitely hit the like button, subscribe if you're not, and as always, we'll see what we come up with next.